Hey everyone, welcome back to Big Strong Book. I'm Reed, and today we are going to be discussing Chapter 6 of the Dragonbone chair, the Cairn on the Cliffs. So this chapter, the moment that we've been building to from the beginning of the book, has finally happened. Prester John has died. But we begin the chapter with Simon being punished for snooping around Green Angel Tower at the end of chapter 5. So I'll read the beginning here. Simon's punishment for his most recent crime was suspension from his new apprenticeship and confinement to the servants' quarters. For days he strode the boundaries of his prison, from the scullery to the linens room and back again, restless as a hooded kestrel. So he is eventually able to get back to, assisting or hanging out with Morghenus, essentially. And he goes in and he notices that somebody else is in there with Morghenus. Lo and behold, it is Prince Joshua. And Joshua is talking to Morghenus about, giving Prester John, giving his father something to ease the pain, to ease his suffering, to essentially allow him to have a peaceful and quick death. And, he's not asking, and he says in here, I'll read it, this is page 71 of the mass market edition. But gods curse it, I am not asking you to interfere with the succession. Joshua's quiet voice was taut as a bowstring. Having to overhear such a conversation embarrassed Simon tremendously, but there was nowhere for him to go without making himself even more conspicuous. I ask you not to meddle with something, Morghenus, Joshua continued. Only give me something that will make the old man's last moments easier. If he dies tomorrow or next year, Elias is still the High King, and I am still Liege Lord only of Naglamund. The prince shook his head. At least think of the ancient bond you and my father share, you who have been his healer and have studied and chronicled his life for scores of years. So that's something that Simon doesn't know, that Morghenus is kind of writing a biography about Prester John. So Morghenus, pushes him back a little bit with this, but then we hear from outside these voices coming up to the door of Morghenus, his workshop, and we get briefly introduced to kind of Joshua's right-hand man, if you will, Daernoth. And Daernoth tells Joshua, your father has died. And so it mentions, after that, there's a little section that just notes the mourning period that Osten Ard and that Erkenland are about to go through, the kind of transitionary period that we're going to see in the interim before he's buried. So it mentions that he lived quite a long life. It appears that Prester John lived until he was probably 100. It mentions that he has died 80 years after he had slain the devil worm Shurikai and ridden back in triumph through the gates of Urchester. So if one would assume that he was maybe 20 years old then he probably died 100 plus. So he was obviously a very, very old king. But one of the interesting things that comes with any sort of important funeral, and this is the case in our own world too. I think of, when Queen Elizabeth died last year, or any big world leader of a prominent country. It could be even when a president of the United States dies. Whenever there's a big state funeral, you get not only important figures that were native to that land, but you also get foreign dignitaries. Now, of course, technically Osten Ard, they're all under one rule. They were under the rule of Prester John, but you have all of the other, you have all the states, Naban, the Rimmersgard, the Ron, the Thurthings, the Hernestiri. You have people from just about everywhere. And so we get introduced, just mainly in passing, to the people that are coming. So we have Skali Sharpnose of Kalskreich. Duke is Grimner's unloved cousin. We have men from the Thurthings. We have the son of the Duke of Naban. So the Duke of Naban is Duke Leobardus, and he sends his son Benegaris. And Benegaris, they note that he's kind of a disappointment to be his father's successor, because we also get a mention here of the greatest knight of the age of John was this man named Camerus. And it says here, Camerus had been a mighty, towering man, or so said those old enough to have remembered him. And Benegaris, truth to tell, looked to run a little to fat. But it had been almost 40 years since Camerus saw Venida had been lost at sea. Many of the younger folks suspected that his stature had grown somewhat in the memories of gaffers and gossips. So we get a little bit about the history of Naban, at least in relation to Camerus, his brother Leobardus, who is Duke, and then the Duke's son, Benegaris. And then another important emissary, essentially, from Naban is the lector of the Adonite church, and that is Lector Ranison. And then the story transitions to a section from his point of view, and his aide, the Ranison's aide, is Father Dinovan. And both of these characters, we're introduced to them here, but this isn't the only time that we're going to see Ranison or Dinovan throughout this series. But Ranison seems a little more at ease, a little more, I don't want to say pessimistic about the Adonite church, because that's not the case, but he seems more at ease with what the years have done to his resolve. And Father Dinovan clearly is this very, this very pious man, and a very, very protective, because, as they're coming down off the ship in the port, Dinovan kind of grabs onto him, because he's like, I don't want your death, like Ranison, kind of tumbling off the dock to kind of be Dinovan's undoing. So that was a little bit of a funny section, but we get a little bit of insight into Ranison, obviously, because this little 3-page portion of the chapter is from his perspective. But it says here, and I'll just read this is from page 77. Fortunately, Ranison held hope for Elias. The prince was undoubtedly courageous, decisive, bold, all traits rare in the sons of great men. The king-to-be was also short-tempered and somewhat careless, but, dual swulsti, these were faults often cured, or at least softened, by responsibility and good counsel. As he reached the top of the Kingsley stairs and entered with his struggling retinue onto the royal walk that circumscribed the walls of Erdchester, the lector promised himself that he would send a trustworthy advisor to help the new king, and of course to keep a wary eye out for the church's welfare. Someone like Veligus, or even young Dinovan. No, he wouldn't part with Dinovan. Anyway, Ranison would find somebody to counteract Elias' bloody-minded young nobles and that blowing idiot, Bishop Domitus. Then we get into the funeral itself. Duke is Grimner of the Rimmersgard. He is there as well. I'm going to look at something real quick here. Okay. Because I kept calling, because I know that they are the Rimmersmen, and I wasn't sure off the top of my head if the nation as a whole is referred to as the Rimmersgard. I looked back and it is. That's just my own peace of mind. I wasn't sure if I was misrepresenting that. So we have the funeral, and Simon is kind of up. There's an abandoned choir section, pews up top. And so he's looking in, and he notes to himself, he's like, there are all these dignitaries here, these dignitaries from all over Osten Ard that are here for King John's funeral, but I'm the only servant person here. And he's like, it's just interesting. He's like, almost as if he's witnessing something. He knows he's witnessing history, but he wonders if he should be there to witness that history. So that's very fascinating. So Lector Ranison, he kind of gives a mass, if you want to call it a mass, the death mass. He gives a death mass and then a eulogy for Prester John, kind of memorializing almost his brashness, or that it says, and he ends this by saying, let's see here, the common people in the city below us say that John Presbyter is not gone, but remains to watch over his people and his Osten Ard. The Book of the Aidenn promises that even now he is ascended to our beautiful heaven of light and music and blue mountains. Others, our brethren, John's subjects in Hernestir, will say that he has gone to join the other heroes in the stars. It matters not. Wherever he is, he who was once young John the King, be he enthroned in bright mountains or stellar fields, we know this: he is happily gazing full into the face of God. So they all leave, and then the next section of this book is from the perspective of Duke Isgrimnur. We get a little bit into him, and it's very fascinating because Duke Isgrimnur is one of Prester John's oldest allies, I would say. And Isgrimnur, as they're taking Prester John's body out, and then they are making their way over to kind of what could be called the burrows, the tombs of the 6 former kings. So he's going to be buried with his predecessors out on kind of this bluff overlooking the water. And Isgrimnur is remembering, just the warrior that John was, but also the carefree attitude he had, because Prester John, when he arrived in Erkenland, he came from the Western Islands, and Duke Isgrimnur remembers when Isgrimnur was a young man, and he would go out with John, and they would go out on John's ship Sea Arrow. And so they make their way to the bier where he is to be buried, and Isgrimnur puts the boots on of John's feet, and it's a very solemn moment. But one thing that's interesting is because, of course, we will remember a few chapters ago, Prester John told, I believe, let me make sure I know who it was here that he talked to. Let's see here. Towser, that's right, that's his name. Prester John tells Towser, he says, regardless of what happens to me, when I die, I want you, Towser, to give Elias my sword called Brightnail. Well, Duke Isgrimnur is he's just finished preparing the body at the bier, and he sees Joshua come next to him, and Joshua puts Brightnail down, and Isgrimnur is confused because he's like, that's Prester John's sword, that's Brightnail. He's like, what is Joshua doing with it? And it's not Joshua's to put on, kind of on this, within this grave. If anything, it should be Elias, and if Elias decided to do that, then that's the right decision. So Isgrimnur's confused, but then they head back. And so then this next section, or really the final section of this book, is the funeral feast. So it's a little bit of a merry gathering, and we get introduced to some of Elias's cronies, I guess you could call them. So we have here Guthwolf of Utenyet, Fengbald, the Earl of Falshire, Bruyagar of the Westfold, and Scully, Sharpnose is there as well. And of course they're kind of a gruff and they're kind of a brutal, not nice ensemble. You know, they're loud and brash, and they're telling all these jokes, and you know, you get the other view of the table where Prince Joshua, Dukas Grimner, and a few other people are sitting, and it's very, the mood is more reserved, whereas it's more boisterous over at Elias's table. So then Simon is at this feast, and he's serving wine. He's kind of like a waiter, and he meets a harpist, Sangfugel, and Sangfugel kind of gives the lay of the land. He, you know, tells Simon who's who, and one note that he mentions is of Pryrates, this Nabani priest who is one of Elias's counselors. You know, he's a man who doesn't have an ounce of hair on his body. He's just this creepy looking guy, and Sangfugel kind of teases Simon, and he's like, some say, you know, that his mother was a witch and his father a demon, you know, and Pryrates he just gives off the most evil villain look to just about everybody. And so then I think Guthwolf and Fengbald they flag Simon over, like, hey, give us some more wine. And so he's pouring all their wine, and he gets to Pryrates, and he kind of pours his wine. He tries to avoid eye contact with him, and there's this kind of dog that's wriggling around, and Simon's trying to get the dog to go away to not bother everybody. And then Pryrates kind of looks down, picks his leg up with his boot, and just kills the dog, just breaks the dog's back. It's like, you know, if you have any doubt that Pryrates might be more altruistic, nicer than these characters seem to think he is, no, like, he killed a puppy. Like, that's about as evil as you can get, right? So then after that, they all go out and they see this bearded star in the night sky, and a lot of people take it as a good omen, like one era has passed and a new era of Elias the king is beginning. And of course, Simon looks back and sees Morghenus, and Morghenus does not seem to think that this star in the sky is a good omen. And that's the end of chapter 6. So in terms of spoilerish stuff, I wouldn't say there's a whole lot that I'm going to comment on. I might, if I think of more spoiler thoughts that stem from this chapter, you know, because we do have a lot of significant characters introduced in chapter 6, but I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot to discuss yet about those characters, so I think I'm going to reserve spoiler discussion probably I'm sure I'll have some spoiler talk to do for chapter 7, so we'll leave that for tomorrow. So yeah, I hope you all liked chapter 6, Cairn on the Cliff, and I look forward to discussing chapter 7 with you all tomorrow. So if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. I noticed that of individuals who are watching this channel, about 70% are not subscribed. So if you like the content that you're seeing but you're not subscribed, I would greatly appreciate it if you'd like to subscribe. So I will see you all tomorrow for the discussion of chapter 7.